All right, now we're not going to London, we're going to Paris. Yeah, that's where Juliana is for the new Global Financial Pact Summit that has been on since yesterday. President Tinubu is there, and yesterday on our sister program, World Today, where Mr. Dele Alake was there to expatiate on some of the moves the president is making. We'll look forward to more of those and how they will implement it back in the country. But for now, Juliana has helped us arrange for a climate change activist. You know, it's all about climate change there, climate financing and all of that. We have joining us Adenike Oladosu, a climate change activist, joining us from Paris to give us some of the conversations there. Good morning, Ms. Oladosu.
Hi, good morning. Thank you.
So how's it going there? We know you're all about climate change and financing and all of that, but a lot of African countries are not happy with the developed countries because I think about $100 billion or so that was promised, we haven't seen it. And yet, cutting down or working on our climate change is going to, well, disturb our economic activities. Fossil fuel, for one, is a major one. So what is new about the conversation on climate change?
Yeah, definitely. There are several new things or new development happening in the climate world. And so we just had the Bonn Climate Conference that happened in Germany a week ago, which is one of the most important summits that is going to shape the COP28 that is going to happen later this year in Emirates, in Dubai. At the same time, now we are having the new global climate finance. And I've been a Nigerian youth delegate on climate finance, and I've been following closely all of these climate-related issues. And currently in France, trying to see how world leaders want to agree, especially from developed country, because it talks about new global financing. And so I'm wondering how they want to synchronize those different financial commitments that they have made in order to say that we'll make this a reality and not just to come and talk, you know, because vulnerable countries like ours in Nigeria have already been faced with this reality that climate change is no longer a threat. And so we need climate finance for just transition and for every other thing in adaptation, in dealing with the climate crisis in order to prevent more loss and damages.
So what are the practical steps that they are suggesting there for developing countries to adopt that, apart from the funding? Maybe they give the funding, but what are some of those practical steps that, you know, can be adopted actually to deal? Because we do know, at least have an idea of some of the losses, both in finances and even in lives. Agricultural potentials are being eroded, the atmosphere, the environment, and all of that. What are some of the practical steps that are being discussed there that developing countries can adopt?
So I've heard from different world leaders, and to summarize it all, is the fact that they talked about debt swap, you know, because many developing countries have a lot of debt to tackle or to deal with. And so we are talking about how do we swap the debt for the climate finance that we need, because I also heard from the president of Kenya on talking about the fact that it takes $5 billion annually to service their debt. And I think the same thing too, Nigeria has a similar scenario on debt servicing. And so they were talking about how do we reform our multilateral organization that will be flexible enough for us to be able to access this finance as quick as possible. We also heard from Pakistan, because last year they had the worst flood that hit their country. And so they're also talking about how do we access this finance. And so it's all about making this finance accessible and also challenging it to climate smart agriculture, to affordable renewable energy sources, and to different areas in our economies that we need a just transition in different areas, looking at the fact that Nigeria have removed its subsidy. And so we have to start talking about how to make renewable energy affordable for everyone. And we also hear from Nigeria to talking about capacity that how do we build our capacity in order to adapt to these changes? And it boils down to climate adaptation in order to prevent to reduce or to prevent loss and damage from the climate crisis as it is right now. That Nigeria is not just faced with a single crisis, but we are faced with multiple crises from the climate crisis. And so everyone is talking about this. How do we synchronize this? How do we come into a concrete conclusion before we leave the summit today? And thereby we talk about how to go from there, from the summit that will be happening, the African Climate Summit that will be happening in Kenya this year in September.
All right. Finally, before we let you go and continue with the meeting, the conversation around carbon credits seems to be gaining grounds, especially around Africa. I think climate change activists like you are trying to sell that to make it attractive for corporates, individuals and companies to, buy into that. Do you have conversations around that going on there?
Yeah, it was also an ongoing discussion too at COP27, where we saw America pushing for it. And the same thing is also an ongoing conversation. It's a welcome development, carbon credits. But also we need not to forget the fact that we also need to transit as soon as possible. That in as much as we have carbon credit, we also need climate finance in order to deal with it, in order to make climate justice evenly distributed. That we need a just transition. We need to start investing on renewable, sustainable energy sources for us to be able to come out of the climate crisis. Because according to reports, most of the climate crisis that we have today, they are from the fossil fuel, but then Africa, Nigeria contributes the least to the global warming. So we expect that the developed country also find ways at which they could also transit, help to make the financial commitment in transiting in as much as we have carbon credits. And another very important discussion that came out from yesterday's discussion was international taxation, which is a good move also. But we also have not to forget that we also need to transit a way to see how we could bring about more renewable energy sources and affordability in this renewable energy. We also need to talk about subsidies in the removal of renewable energy. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for all of that. Adenike Oladusu. Feels like I'm there already. You've given me the lowdown. So I wish you the best in the rest of your conversations over there in Paris.
Thank you.